In September 2020, a vintage Aladdin t-shirt made headlines after it sold online for $6,000.
That person who's listed that shirt, he really thinks that shirt is worth that money, and that's okay. He loves it.
The Disney tease blows my mind, and I don't even think like it's the tip of the iceberg.
It's part of a larger trend, as vintage clothing featuring nostalgic brands, musicians, and cartoon characters saw huge demand during the pandemic lockdown, as online retail surged. The US secondhand market is expected to more than double by 2026, reaching $82 billion.
Over 60% of Gen Z and millennials, when they think about purchasing a new piece of garment, a new piece of fashion, first they go to the vintage store or to the vintage online platform, and then only if they do not find what they are looking for, they look for a new piece of fashion.
And it's seen with thrift hauls and get ready with me videos all over TikTok.
Just some camo pants I just did.
Burberry blazer that I thrifted.
Thrifted shorts.
In an industry driven by the internet, Mars Conti and Ken Mead saw a gap for IRL events in the vintage market and founded ThriftCon.
The best versions of Comic-Con and Complex-Con and the best versions of a flea market got together and got married.
ThriftCon is a highly curated vintage clothing convention that travels across the country, and its founders say these piles of old clothes have turned them into $1 million company. ThriftCon co-owner Mars Conti got into fashion through streetwear when brands like Supreme were first breaking ground.
It just felt like this cool kids club you were a part of, and if you liked and wore these brands and then you were out, you saw someone else in it, it was just an easy a talking point. It immediately created this common bond.
After graduating college, Conti and his friend David Bywater, who would also help start ThriftCon, saw a void in Denver's streetwear options. In 2014, they opened a shop of their own called Station.
We found a space, we opened up like a shop with virtually no money, and it looked awful at first, but we got open and it was just like, and people came.
They were getting so many people trying to buy, sell, trade that they decided, hey, like, let's make this an event.
This small neighborhood market with just a few dozen vendors was the very first ThriftCon.
Did another one, and then once they just kept, growing exponentially, eyes on us from around the country as well, in LA and in New York and things like that. Like, when are you gonna bring this on the road? And so that's exactly what we did.
In 2019, they turned ThriftCon into its own business. That December, ThriftCon did its first out-of-state event in Los Angeles. In March 2020, they did another in Miami. Then, the pandemic hit.
We were just on the rise, getting so excited, and then all of a sudden the whole world shut down.
With the halt of in-person events, ThriftCon was at a roadblock in its first year touring nationally, but it was a turning point for the vintage scene.
Vintage got crazy in 2020. Everyone was sitting at their house, they were looking for different forms of income, looking through all their closets and all this stuff, and then they also had nothing but time. They were just online shopping. So a lot of people discovered the vintage and the secondhand world in that year. We just needed to stay in the conversation.
To do so, they doubled down on their social media presence during lockdown. And in March 2021, they took ThriftCon back on the road, starting in Atlanta with over 8,000 guests.
I was waiting tables, tending bar, wherever anyone would take me. 2020 was the moment when Mars and I decided this is our job now.
What started in a vacant Denver parking lot now sees 40,000 attendees come through its doors each year.
Right now we're at about 6 markets. I'd say we'd like to add 1 or 2 more, so maybe hit 7 or 8 cities next year.
In 2022, they expect to gross $1 million for the first time, coming mostly from ticket sales and vendor booths.
I think what's really kind of mind-blowing is that it's $1 million in a day for the vendors. There's going to be $1 million spent here, and we know that based off of survey responses from guests and vendors both.
It's not only turned into something for us that is a lifeline, it's turned into a lifeline for so many other people that we consider friends and family,
Most of the items sold range from $10 to $50, with some as cheap as $1. As ThriftCon continues to grow, the founders hope to inspire a more sustainable way of shopping and living.
The real idea of this, in a nutshell, is to just encourage people to dabble in vintage clothing. Secondhand doesn't, mean second class, and there needs to be some significant changes to the way we're consuming.
Every year we produce something like 92 million tons of textile waste.
Most of ThriftCon's attendees are between the ages of 18 and 30. Cipriani says the popularity of vintage speaks to the environmental and social awareness of consumers and younger generations.
We wear our clothing 36% less times than what we used to do 15 years ago. We have grown accustomed to buying and wearing just a few times and then dumping away. When it is not dumped in a landfill, this textile waste is incinerated.
ThriftCon holds a clothing drive at every event, but many of ThriftCon's vendors also use sustainability practices. Taryn Erlacher is the co-owner and co-founder of the Thrift Lord. His vintage tees are often seen on It couple Kourtney Kardashian and Travis Barker, yet he sources much of his inventory from rag houses, which are often the last stop for discarded clothes before being turned into scraps or sent to developing countries.
Vintage, particularly like 90s and older stuff, even early 2000s, like it's made better. It's gonna last longer.
Tommy Grunendijk and Jordan Deary, the owners of Vintage Stock Reserve, upcycle used clothes, cutting and resewing each by hand to create new designs.
People are seeing that these practices from fast fashion, they're not sustainable. They're seeing the damage that it's creating. I think they're interested in finding ways to promote like a positive change.
Take Nike's newly updated Air Jordan 1 Lost and Found, which features intentional cracking and fading to mimic the aging of an original pair from 1985.
The companies that aren't vintage starting to try to make the vintage look, right? So like they're getting in on it. It's all very new and it's very exciting.
For the co-founders, the mainstream fashion industry's response to the vintage boom proves their own lead in the game. But that's not what drives ThriftCon.
It's more of a passion. It's not as if it turns off when I leave the office, like I stop looking at vintage things online or streetwear. I go home and I'm still looking at all of the same stuff. I can't get away from it, and I don't really have any desire to either.
What you got on this one? 30. Okay, that's a maybe. I like that one.